Hello and welcome to Quadriga. An escalating war of words this week as Turkey's leaders attacked their German counterparts in harsh personal terms. The political theatrics came as the Turkish president and his Minister for European Affairs accused Germany of racism and lies. That followed President Erdogan's attempt to influence the upcoming German parliamentary elections by calling on Turks with dual citizenship not to vote for the party's currently governing Germany, and Turkey prevailed upon Spain to detain a German-Turkish author it regards as a threat. Erdogan's provocation. Who can stop him? That's the question we want to discuss today with our guests. And it is a pleasure to welcome Dilek Kurban. She's a columnist for the Turkish magazine Welt, and she's also a lecturer at the Hertie School of Governance. She says, in the absence of sufficient social, legal, or political force at the domestic level, only concerted external pressure in the form of comprehensive sanctions can potentially stop Erdogan. And we're very glad to have Bülent Mumay with us once again. He was formerly head of the online service at Turkey's largest newspaper, Recep. He was dismissed under government pressure, emigrated to Germany, and now writes for media, including the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. And he says Erdogan's a strong elected leader. The only measure to stop him is the ballot box. Pressure from outside's not effective. It's too late. The reason is the hypocrisy of the Western world. And finally, great to have Alan Posener back on the show. He's a commentator for the daily newspaper Die Welt. He says Turkey remains an essential ally in the region, but it's time to tell the Turks they can't elect an Islamist bully and at the same time hope to become members of the European Union. Bülent Mumay, Turkish leaders comparing their German counterparts to Nazis, accusing them of racism and lies. That's pretty strong stuff. What is going on?
Well, actually, of course, that started since 1 year. It's going on, and it's not a new process. It's not just Erdogan's last statements. As you know, it started with arresting the German journalists in Turkey, like Deniz Yücel, and like banning Erdogan's political rallies in Germany. It's a continuing process. The thing is, Erdogan doesn't want to hear any kind of criticism. So actually, that was the reason that he is cutting the ties from the West and not to be a member of EU and, turning his face to the East instead of West. So being criticized from West makes him crazy. And that's the reason any kind of critics coming from West, especially from Germany, that the country which has a problem recently with Turkey, he becomes much more angry about it and accuses Germany with racism, being Nazi, etc.
So, Dilek Kurban, as we just heard, German-Turkish relations have been deteriorating for a while. Is this latest measure nonetheless a kind of escalation? Are we reaching some sort of point of no return?
Well, I think it's going to escalate, keep going to escalate certainly until the elections in Germany, perhaps beyond until the 2019 elections in Turkey. And it's because it benefits Erdogan, and he's going to escalate this as much as he can, as long as he can, because this is populist rhetoric. He's conveying a certain message to his constituency in Turkey that he's a strong leader, and that Turkey doesn't bow to Europe. It's empty, of course, and it will continue unless and until Europe and the German politicians stand up for themselves.
So this is a tightrope act, Alan Posener, as you said in your opening statement. You said Turkey remains an essential partner for the West. But if you listen to this language, it hardly sounds like the alliance is functional.
No, it's difficult. But look, let's put things in perspective. I can remember when Mr. Silvio Berlusconi was Prime Minister of Italy, he bashed Germany because I remember when the Kaczynski twins ran Poland, now it's just one of them, they bash Germany all the time. Germany bashing is great because, with our past, we set ourselves up for it. So I think, as far as the war of words is concerned, let's step back a bit and wait. Things like imprisonment of Deniz Yücel and, by the way, hundreds of other journalists are much more important. But even there, though I'm talking about a friend of mine and a colleague, there is also a geopolitical aspect to this. We need Turkey. Who else do we have in the region? And so as you say, it's a tightrope. We can't just pretend it's just us and Turkey. It's a whole setup. There's Syria to think about, there's Russia to think about, there's Iran to think about. So we need somehow to restrain Erdogan without estranging Turkey.
So how that can be done is something we want to address later. But let's take a look first at the levels of these tensions that are not only verbal. As we've just heard, there have also been detentions of a number of German citizens, including the German journalist Deniz Yücel, and most recently, a German author of Turkish origin who was vacationing in Spain. The Spanish police detained him, acting on a Turkish request for extradition that came by way of the international police agency, Interpol. Let's take a look.
I thought I was safe in European countries, and that the long arm of Erdogan's despotism and arrogance could not reach that far.
Turkey accuses Doğan Akanlı, among other things, of having taken part in a robbery years ago. Akanlı was acquitted of the charges, but the Turkish judiciary has since rescinded that acquittal. The writer believes this is an attempt to silence him. In his books, he writes about Turkey's mass killings of Armenians as genocide, a taboo in Ankara's view. Akanlı has lived in Germany for 26 years and has German citizenship. Until a decision is reached on Turkey's request for his extradition, he has to remain in Spain. Are critics of Erdogan, such as Akanlı, no longer safe in Europe?
Bülent Mumay, the charges against Akanlı look trumped up. A court has found that, in fact, they don't stand. So Turkey's request looks pretty thin indeed. What's the aim? Is Turkey really targeting him, or are they targeting Germany?
Well, I think it's a little bit an overrated issue, Doğan Akanlı's issue. There are a lot of people whose cases are still open in Turkey and living in Germany, having different citizenships. So I don't think that they aimed to arrest Doğan Akanlı. He had a case in Turkey, we knew that, and it's still continuing. And you know, when you are not in the country and when you don't go to the justice, they sometimes search for you by using Interpol. And I think that was a coincidence. I don't think that they aimed it because he wasn't a popular and a politic figure in Turkey recently. So I don't think that it's a critical issue.
So, Dilek Kurban, that would sound like it's almost a bureaucratic mistake. Do you see it that way?
I would doubt it. I mean, of course, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but I don't think this is accidental because this is, you know, the Turkish government is resorting to a strategy they have not done before, right? Going through Interpol. And, you know, the fact that he's a German citizen of Turkish origin who has written about the Armenian genocide and the Kurdish question quite critically is important. This is coming, again, before the elections in Germany. I think the regime in Turkey is sending a message to both Turkey and to Germany and the Turks here. And they're going to, you know, they're going to keep pushing this. But it is, of course, outrageous. And the fact that he was even taken into custody in Spain, I find... I mean, maybe, you know, they thought, OK, we have to do this because there's an arrest warrant, but I find it actually outrageous.
But the thing is, his accusations for Turkey, critics about Turkey are not new. Like, he didn't write anything new about Turkey. So I don't think that that's a new issue about Turkish and German relationship.
Well, yes, but why do they now bring it up? He was acquitted, right, in 2010.
But as the Spanish police told that he was accident, you know, he was just a coincidence. They checked his ID. I mean, it doesn't look like a critical issue. I think so.
Regardless, obviously, there's room for several points of view on this, but regardless of that, the case is a weak one, Alan Posener. Shouldn't Interpol perhaps have acted differently in this case? And how can we prevent abuse of international institutions like Interpol by despotic leaders like Erdogan?
Yeah, well, I presume that Interpol is going to be looking very carefully at the way red flags go up and people are just taken off the street or from the hotel room, the way Mr. Akanlı was. And that's going to have to change. At the same time, there is a case for cooperating with Turkey and Interpol in the fight against terror, in the fight against drugs, in all sorts of fights where we really need the cooperation of the Turkish police, who aren't entirely in the business of suppressing their own people. They're also in the business, actually, of fighting crime. We have to... It's like, you know, in all these cases, you have to differentiate. I'm more worried, actually, less than that, you know, you might be taken off the street when you're in Spain or wherever. I'm more worried about the agents of Mr. Erdogan here in Germany, for instance, who, you know, if someone is visiting a school which is run by the Gülen organization, who will go to these people.
An organization which President Erdogan sees as a rival and as behind last year's putsch attempt.
Right.
Sorry, just for clarification for our
exactly.
viewers.
If you know, and they run schools in Germany, by the way, very good schools, though they're a rather shady organization. These people are being intimidated. You know, members of the Gülenist organization, which is a legal organization in Germany, but is forbidden, of course, in Turkey, and used to be allies of Mr. Erdogan, now they've fallen out, are being threatened with their lives. You know, that's what you really need to be worried about. Erdogan has thousands of people working for him here in Germany, actively intimidating people.
And, of course, the case of the author, Mr. Akanli, is only one case of a detention of a German citizen. We've mentioned several times. A German journalist has been in jail for over 6 months, Dennis Yücel. A German translator and a German human rights worker are all now sitting in Turkish prisons. About a month ago, Germany responded by altering what had been a fairly moderate approach toward Turkey heretofore. The German foreign minister, who is now the target of much of the harsh rhetoric we're hearing out of Ankara, approved the issuance of travel warnings for German tourists and also told German companies that investment in Turkey could prove risky. Let's see what followed that.
I call on all my countrymen in Germany not to support these parties. The Christian Democrats, the Social Democrats, and the Greens are enemies of Turkey.
I don't want people here to be incited against each other from outside. We're a democratic country, and we refuse to tolerate any outside interference in our democracy. Apart from that, I love Turkey and the Turks, and Mr. Erdogan can change nothing about that.
Who are you to talk to the president of Turkey? Talk to Turkey's foreign minister. Know your limits. And he is trying to teach us a lesson? How long have you been in politics? How old are you?
How old are you? Dilek Kurban, a pretty unusual move. A head of state telling citizens of another country how to vote. Is this provocation largely symbolic, or could it have a real impact on the German election? There are, after all, a large number of German Turkish voters in this country. How are they reacting to all of this?
Well, I think that's something that remains to be seen, right? Because this whole dynamic is new. Turkish citizens living abroad have been granted the right to vote in general and parliamentary elections and referendum only in recent years. So this is something that the Turkish citizens here, I mean, this kind of choice, they never had to make this choice until the recent years. We will have to see how this reacts. But I think maybe just to put, if I may, in historical context, this kind of rhetoric coming from the Turkish government is actually also not new. You know, it just reminds me, for example, in the 1990s, when a state minister in Turkey, for example, accused 3 female members of the European Parliament who were in Turkey for a fact-finding mission on human rights of being, and this I'm using now a softer language of the, you know, what he used, of prostitutes from Europe. He said that, and then in the next government, he was given another position again. We're talking about human rights activists, German human rights activists in the 1990s. Helmut Oberdick, a very renowned human rights activist from Germany, was very active in Turkey and who was working on documentation of torture. He was declared persona non grata and deported from Turkey. So it's not just Erdogan regime. The Turkish government, the Turkish regime is authoritarian, has always been, and there's a historical precedent for that. And you can also look at, historically, how Europe has reacted. You know, what you said earlier, which I do not share, but this view is very, very prevalent. You know, this whole idea of, oh, we need Turkey, realpolitik. Turkey needs Europe and Germany more than Germany and Turkey Germany and Europe need Turkey.
But given that, Bülent Mumay, how can Turkey afford to alienate Germany to this degree? This direct election recommendation that was issued by President Erdogan is being taken pretty seriously by the German government.
I think it shouldn't be. The reason is, you know, there are more than like 4 million people living here from Turkey. Half of them, let's say, most of them are not German. They don't have German passports, and just 1 million people have German passports, which has right to vote. The thing is, the people who has German passports are much more well integrated to German community. So the people who has the right to vote here in Germany, who has Turkish origins, I don't think they will be so much influenced by Mr. Erdogan. The second issue is the Turkish voters, they used to, 64% of them were voting for SPD. And Mr. Erdogan told them not to vote for them. But let's think, if they don't vote for SPD, who will gain from that? Frau Merkel. So that will never work. So it's a pity. And the third thing is, let's not vote for these 3 parties for whom they can vote. Let's talk about 3 other parties. One party, the Die Linke, calls Erdogan as terrorist several times.
The leftist party.
The leftist party. The liberals, FDP, the leader of FDP called Erdogan, let's not say called, compared Erdogan with Hitler and compared the coup attempt with the Reichstag fire. So the third choice is the racists, the AfD, Alternative for Deutschland. So they don't want the Turks from here. So what can the Turkish people can vote for here? So it's a silly offer and it won't work. I can understand why the German community is being crazy, but it won't work here.
So then let me ask you this, Alan Posener. Given all of that, it sounds like the consequences of this for the German election actually wouldn't be that strong. Is the rhetoric that we're hearing here in Berlin perhaps also partly or largely intended for domestic political consumption? We do have an election coming up in this country.
Definitely. I mean, I think that for Mr. Schulz, for instance, the leader of the Social Democrats, it's great to be attacked by Mr. Erdogan. The last time he was attacked by Mr. Berlusconi, who compared him to a capo in a concentration camp, right? The leader of Italy at the time. So Schulz loves being attacked by foreign leaders. You know, I mean, he's fighting a losing battle against Ms. Merkel. It's fine if he gets attacked, and Mr. Gabriel from the same party, our foreign minister, if he can at the same time declare, I love Turkey, but I'm being attacked by Mr. Erdogan. No way are we going to let ourselves be influenced by this. That's great. So I think, yes, it's a lot of, it's more words than deeds. Thank goodness.
Okay. Then let's say there's general consensus here amongst the 3 of you that at least the the war of words is perhaps not to be taken all that seriously. Nonetheless, you've also all 3 made clear you do see Turkey sliding toward increasing despotism, and you do think something needs to be done about that. But I have 2 of you saying in your opening statements there are measures that can be taken from outside, and you, Bülent Mumay, saying it's too late for external pressure. So let's come now to our title question, which is who can stop Erdogan's provocations? And let me ask you this. We've seen this heating up of the rhetoric and perhaps also of the actions partly since the German Chancellor herself decided to take a stronger stand. About a month ago, as I say, she left the course of moderation. She said she thinks there shouldn't be a deepening of customs union with Turkey. Does the fact that Turkey reacted pretty strongly indicate that maybe outside pressure from Germany can make a difference?
Well, it's not the pressure from outside. It's about finance. It's about economy. Turkish economy is, unfortunately, a weak economy recently. Since 2011, I mean, it's like when our democracy is going down, our financial system is going down too. I mean, the financial sanctions, the economic sanctions from Europe, of course, can harm Turkish economy and can harm Erdogan's government. The problem is it's too late for that. Since Erdogan came in power, Ms. Merkel came to Turkey for 15 times. And recently, in 1.5 years, she visited Ankara and Istanbul for 6 times. And I'm sure she didn't visit her hometown 6 times in the last 1.5 years. The problem is, today they can decide to put pressure on Turkey, but unfortunately, it's too late. Was Turkey's democracy better 1.5 years ago? It was not. Of course, the military coup made things worse in the country. And now they chose to use the economic measures against Turkey. That can harm Turkey, and I'm sure that in Turkey, the government is afraid of that. As you know, they gave a list to Interpol accidentally 1 month ago, and Turkish government accused, let's say, Mercedes and BASF as helping terrorist organizations as companies from Germany, and they complained about them to Interpol. And then they said, oh, that accidentally happened. So, of course, they are afraid of what's going on in the country and if the investment come or not. I just want to tell you just 2 small examples briefly. Let's say Germany is putting economic sanctions to Turkey. The thing is, Erdogan has 2 very big, powerful media organizations in Turkey. And one of their owners called Ethem Sancak. And Ethem Sancak will produce tanks with a German partner. Who is it? Rheinmetall. The second thing, the Turkey's biggest state contract was given for wind power mills. Last month it has given. Who gave it? The energy minister. Who is the energy minister? Son-in-law of Erdogan. Which company won that contract? His brother, the son-in-law's brother, won it. And who is the partner? Who is the German partner? Siemens. So if we will put, if the German government need to be sincere.
So, given the fact that both sides need each other, what kind of economic pressure could work here and from whom? And do you see the political will to exact that kind of pressure? Alan?
No, and I don't think it would be a good idea. The point is we have to really look back here and look where we are. The point is that the West is really under attack from Mr. Putin, from China, from Islamist terror. And in this big scheme of things, Turkey is by no means clearly on the other side. It's still more or less on our side. We have to be careful not to alienate and push them into the camp of our enemies. This is why we're between a rock and a hard place here. And so this is why I think that that economic ties with Turkey are excellent and very good.
But in your opening statement, you said somebody needs to tell Turkey that they can't be an Islamist bully and simultaneously look for customs union, for example.
I didn't say customs. I'm in favour of customs union. I'm just against them being a member of the European Union because they don't accept, as long as Mr. Erdogan is in power, and it was the case, of course, before that, they simply don't have the same values. The government doesn't have the same values as the European Union has. Out of our own self-respect, we should say enough is enough. Mrs. Merkel was right. Privileged partnership is fine, but that's it. It's a question of self-respect. It's a question of are we going cap in hand saying, will you please be members? Or are we saying, look, we're a club, we have certain standards?
Germany gets some economic support from the EU in preparation for, Turkey, for possible membership in the EU. Should that be capped, yes or no?
How much is it? 4 billion or something? It's not much. It doesn't matter.
It goes to the NGOs, not to the government, actually. So.
Okay. Dilek Kurban, where do you stand?
Well, let's start with the EU.
Who could effect what kind of pressure?
Let's start with the EU and the whole question of self-respect and our values. Accession status also means something, right? Not everyone is given an accession status. Only those who fulfill the Copenhagen criteria, which includes the rule of law, minority protection, etc. Does Turkey deserve to be an accession status still? Right. So one thing to be done, and this I've said earlier also, remove the accession status, cancel accession status, make Turkey again a candidate, lower its status to candidacy. That will have immediate repercussions for foreign direct investment in Turkey because accession status has a value. If we're talking about EU being sincere and, standing up for its values, there you start, first of all.
Agree.
Second, and, it's not first of all, it's a matter of principle. Even if it's 4 billion, some of which, of course, goes to the Turkish government, to the Ministry of Justice, for what rule of law reform? There's no rule of law in Turkey. There's no democracy in Turkey. This whole discussion, I think, we cannot discuss this based on the assumption that we have a police who's fighting against crime, so this is rule of law, and a government that we need to cooperate with. This is an authoritarian regime which only understands a certain language that has to be used and actions. So what I would say, concretely, in addition, cancel all the funds that go from EU for rule of law, human rights reform, cancel Turkey's accession status, and economic sanctions. History is full of countries where economic sanctions has worked. It works because, as you also said, Turkey is not Russia. It doesn't have natural resources. It is so reliant on Europe. And we will see how then, and it's a NATO ally also, it will work. I believe in that.
Bülent Mumay, Alan Posener implied that if Europe and or Germany were to push too hard, they might push Germany right over to the other side in, for example, the struggle against terrorism, in terms of also attempting to keep migrant flows in check. Is that a real risk? Should Europe be more cautious, given the fact that Europe does need Turkey?
Absolutely. Like a huge, when Turkey is being criticized more, of course, not just the government, the public too. They feel themselves bad. They're becoming less fan of Europe and the West. Of course, that's a huge risk. That should be done very carefully. That's why all steps should be sincere.
Thank you very much to all of you for being with us today, and thanks to all of you for joining us. See you soon.